The Soviet Dreadnought class battlecruiser is a lot like any other Soviet ship, except completely different. Hi, and welcome back to the Red Alert Armory series as we explore a 70s missile-based take on the Dreadnought-era battleship. The Dreadnought class battlecruiser is the capital ship of the mighty Soviet Navy in Red Alert 2, and fills a very interesting role when you consider the real-life Soviet priorities, an invasion support bombardment role. Designed around the real-life Kirov, or Sea Eagle guided missile cruisers, the Dreadnought class takes the opposite role as its real-life counterpart, eschewing the Kirov's defensive role in favor of mass attack. Armed with two V3 launch systems capable of firing dozens of missiles an hour, the Dreadnought is purely an offensive bombardment platform. Each V3 missile contains hundreds of pounds of explosives, and is capable of tracking to a target and detonating with force enough to completely level fortified buildings or defenses in individual volleys. The missiles have ranges exceeding 400 kilometers, but are unable to home onto moving targets, making them fairly inaccurate versus fast-moving Allied targets. Each Dreadnought carries 36 of these V3 missiles, relies on the ammunition ships to get more of them onto the firing platform after running dry. Each Dreadnought is capable of moving at 30 knots and carries enough armor to resist hits from aircraft, other naval vessels, and land-based systems, like tanks or even grand cannons, provided that the hits are superficial. The Dreadnought carries over 750 crew into battle and has a range dependent on the speed it travels, unlimited at 20 knots, and around 1100 nautical miles at 30 knots. These ships have very powerful radar systems capable of seeing targets across the horizon, although the Soviets have yet to have access to the internet and space-based assets like spy satellites in this universe, and primarily utilize aerial recon to find their targets. Aircraft, such as helicopters of certain sizes, are capable of landing on the aft section of the ship, although this is never represented in-game. Each ship is driven by nuclear engines and steam-driven conventional engines for extra bursts of speed and for movement when the reactors are offline. These ships were famously used in the invasion of New York City, where their missiles toppled the Statue of Liberty and nearly broke the back of resistant forces on the ground. Seen across the Third World War conflict, there appears to be dozens of these ships, which provides an interesting look into the differences between this world and the real world, including the history between the first and second games, the priorities and capabilities of the Soviet Union in Red Alert 2, and the readiness level of Western Allied forces. The presence of so many of these warships in the battlefields of the Third World War belies special circumstances that must have taken place between the world wars to allow the Soviets, who in our world were too hemmed in and strapped for cash to afford a full-fledged USA-style navy, to flourish enough to build dozens of multi-billion ruble ships, the size of battleships, under the noses of the Allies. The first of these circumstances hinted at is the resolution of the Second World War, where, unlike Germany in World War II, Russia was not partitioned, and its empire was not dismantled. It appears that after the end of the war, the man that would become the President of the United States in Red Alert 2 installed the former member of the Romanov family as the premier of the Soviet puppet state, the same man that would rule until the ultimate victory of the Allies in the days before the Russian secret agents changed the timeline once again. With this victory achieved, it appears that the Allies went through a period of disarmament, with many of the submarines of the Allied fleets as well as many anti-Soviet measures being abandoned in favor of large, primarily defensive fleets and systems. This peace seemed to have lulled the Allied war machine to sleep, creating a fallacy of trust in their Soviet quote-unquote allies, but allowed the Soviets to begin rebuilding their navies and ground forces out in the open. It is unknown what the heads of intelligence and security were doing in the years before Yuri destroyed the Allies' nuclear weapon stockpiles, but it seemed they massively dropped the ball. It is possible that Yuri was already so integrated into the Soviet system that he was able to manipulate the terms of disarmament such that it lured the Allies into a false sense of security, although not clearly totally, as the Allies remained in a military faction from the Second World War into the Third. The priorities of the Soviet National Forces is another interesting thing to consider. The Kirov warships in real life were largely built with defensive intentions in mind, being able to counter the immensely powerful carrier battle groups posed by the United States. In addition, the lack of submarines in the Allied fleet created a vacuum to allow the Russians to create the largest subfleet in the world, subs being a purely offensive sort of vehicle. All signs point to the Soviet military gearing up for an active invasion outside of Europe, to invade and defeat its main rival, the USA, or at least to distract them at home long enough for them to sweep in and take all of Europe. How the US intelligence didn't see this is unknown, especially since one of the primary ships of the Allied fleet, the destroyer, was primarily designed as an anti-submarine ship, which shows that they were at least somewhat aware of the incoming situation. That and the early adoption of the Aegis destroyer lends to the idea that maybe some in the military apparatus, perhaps General Carville, anticipated an attack of this sort and prepared countermeasures, while the civilian authority was asleep at the wheel. Either way, the Dreadnought heavy cruiser were immensely powerful naval units designed and fully capable of decimating shore and inland defenses in the Soviets' bid to completely control Europe. Their lack of versatility may have been a deadly drawback. But when your only predator is a Navy SEAL or Tanya, I'd say that the design was largely successful. Nothing could stop a pair or a trio of these ships once they set their mind to destroy a target. The Soviets had more than enough of them to win the war. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have an idea that might strengthen or reduce the strength of my argument, or you just want to start a conversation, please comment it down below. If you come up with something great, I will host it as a follow-up video and credit you heavily. If you like videos about Tiberium, Red Alert, or in the future, CNC Generals, then why don't you subscribe and hit the bell icon. I post once or twice every 2 weeks. If you really like the content, please consider supporting the channel by sharing the video around, or making use of either the Patreon link or the Amazon affiliate link. No pressure to do either, I love you either way. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.